first and foremost, I just want to say thank you very much for collaborating and making this happen because I I wasn't sure you were going to be up for this, and and once you said yes, I'm like awesome because you have such a reputation in your industry, and we share something in common. French Laundry. My wines are in French Laundry, and your products are also in French Laundry. So that's actually how I discovered you.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, yeah, it's such a small world, and I was super excited to have the chance to work with you on this too. Also because as this whole crazy new world has unfolded, just trying to connect with people over digitally and over video and doing kind of virtual tastings and stuff seems like kind of where things are at right now. So hopefully people will like it and be able to learn something and get to know us a little bit better. So.
Absolutely. I want to start off with this Chardonnay really quickly.
Okay. There we go. This is my really fancy stemless glass.
There you go.
It smells great.
So cheers.
Cheers.
This is a 2015 Chardonnay, Russian River Valley, Ritchie Vineyard. And it's all old one take clone. And that kind of gives you this tropical nature that's not like your typical Chardonnay notes that you might experience, such as like buttery notes, whatnot. You get more of that like butterscotch right now, creme brulee finish, but you get more of that like melony, guava fruit flavor first before that creme brulee finish comes off. And that's because it was barrel aged in French oak for about 19 months.
Wow.
Which is about 2.5 times longer than the average Chardonnay barrel aging. But we got to try it with your cheese. So tell me about your cheese.
The cheese that I chose for the Chardonnay is one called Kunik. This is a triple creme cheese. So triple creme means that it has over 85% butterfat. In this case, that butterfat is coming from goat's milk that's been spiked with a little bit of Jersey cow cream. And this is made up at Nettle Meadow Farm in the Adirondacks. And I always say that this cheese is kind of like goat milk gelato with the rind. It's just like super decadent, really creamy and luscious. And because there's the addition of cow cream, that kind of animal musky quality that you might associate with goat cheese just isn't really there. You can tell me if I'm lying, but. And cheeses like this that are really rich and buttery, I feel like can go with Chardonnays that have a little bit more depth and complexity like this, because that butterfat wants some acid to balance it out, and also those kind of tropical fruit flavors and the creme brulee kind of as a whole package, I think would just really
that's like an explosion. Everything together, it's like the perfect pairing because the Chardonnay is big and this cheese is so it's like buttery,
It's funny. It's kind of deceptively simple in its appearance, but then you taste it and it's just like wow. It packs a punch.
Yeah, and so does this wine. So it's kind of the perfect pairing.
I think it's great. I don't know. It just really it was a beautiful pairing.
I may need to revisit that piece of cheese.
Yeah.
So do you eat the rind on this Kunik?
Oh yeah. My rule of thumb is unless it's made from wax, cloth, or bark, I always at least try the rind. I don't always like it, especially with the more aged cheeses that have been aged for maybe, I don't know, longer than 6 months or so. The rind can start to be a little intense. But absolutely with a soft cheese like this Kunik, the rind is a really integral part of the overall flavor. It tends to impart some kind of mushroomy and kind of earthier flavors, which for the Kunik is nice because you have that like really overt butter flavor, and then it's really kind of tempered by the rind as well. I always hate it when I'm at a party and I see a cheese like Kunik or a brie style cheese. And
I'm really sorry.
Well, it's okay. If I've got my fancy wine glass and you didn't eat the rind.
will eat this later, I promise.
But yeah, no, I always tell people definitely try it. And so as you know, preemptive, the Wischego that we're going to try third, that one is wax on the outside. So don't eat the rind on that one. But otherwise, definitely try the rind.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for teaching me that little tidbit.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the Calderwood and the Cabernet, shall we?
Absolutely.
Oh, one last thing I forgot to tell you about this Chardonnay is that when the wine gets to the optimal drinking temperature, you'll see that the label changes color to a purple color. So do you see this purple right here? I'm going to show you up to the screen. You see how the lines are purple? Well, if I were just to warm it up right now with my hand, just a little bit, it'll completely go away.
Wow, it's like a very like high-end version of the Coors Light label.
Yes, it is.
Wow, that's cool. I just did it too. So that means mine's at the right temperature because hang on, it's
it is. Yes. It's thermochromic ink and it changes at 50 degrees.
Wow, that's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Well, I mean, more about the labels later, but I know that one of them also glows in the dark. So I would love to know more about what inspires your artwork and the labels and all that kind of stuff.
A lot of sleepless nights.
Oh, that's great.
So we're going to go on to the Cabernet next.
Okay.
By the way, all these wines are 2015. It was another drought year for us, but it was another stellar vintage for us. All of these wines got rated very, very highly by the critics, except for the 15 Auder. Auder doesn't get rated. It's our entry-level wine, and it sells out on its own. I usually produce about 99 to 200 cases of it every year. So very low production. Everything is very low production. I make about 1,000 cases of wine a year. So most people have never heard of me.
Well, just the smell of this one before I even taste it is just amazing. I mean, can you talk about the importance of kind of like, you know, the temperature the wine should be served at, both white and red, and kind of, you know, smelling before drinking, and what's your kind of, how do you like to do it?
So I don't want to set rules because I think that, like I said earlier, you should just drink whatever you love and how you love it. But a solid rule of thumb is for white wines to serve it somewhere in the 40s, and then red wines serve it somewhere in the 50s. So a lot of sommeliers will set their wine coolers to about 44 degrees Fahrenheit for the whites and 55 degrees Fahrenheit for the reds. I think that's a little colder than where I like to enjoy my wines, especially with Chardonnay. Chardonnay, I think it gets good in the high 50s to low 60s. That's where it starts to really evolve. So I might serve it around 50, like right where the label changes color, but then really enjoy it over the next like 45 minutes as it warms up and really all those notes start to evolve. This is a very special Cabernet because it was the one and only year I got fruit in Oakville, right next door to a famous winery that charges about $1,000 a bottle. I'm not going to say who, but I use a lot of mountain fruit, a lot of volcanic terroir. That's like what drives my red wine program. And I also have a little vineyard on Howell Mountain, on the slopes of Howell Mountain, I should say, about 35 feet below the actual Howell Mountain AVA line. So I can't technically say it's Howell Mountain, but I'm 35 feet. I'm like 11 yards away from Howell Mountain. So yeah, there's Howell Mountain, there's Atlas Peak, Pritchard Hill, and then there's also Oakville. And it's the first time I've integrated that volcanic mountain fruit with some of that hillside fruit from the other side of Napa Valley. And you get this kind of new school meets old school characteristic, which I think has allowed it to age beautifully well in that like kind of Bordeaux-esque sense, but Napa style.
Yeah. I mean, the smell and the taste are totally different. When I smelled it, I expected it to be much sweeter and kind of more I don't know, just kind of, I don't know. It's very rich, but it's also like elegant and like understated in its richness, you know? And there's, you know, a nice dry, earthy quality that I really enjoy and didn't expect.
Thank you. My style is usually pretty big overall, but I make my wines with Philip Titus. He's the winemaker over at Chapelet, and he's my consultant. So we do the blendings together, and every time we blend, I want to make the wines bigger, and he wants to bring me back down to earth and make it more elegant. And the problem is that when you make it more elegant, you lose a lot of that character, that bigness, that boldness, that character that I love. So it's a trade-off. Like it's all about balance. And whenever we blend Cabernet, which is very different from when we blend any other varietal, whenever we blend Cabernet, the first blending, my favorite will be his last favorite, and vice versa. And then we might agree on our number twos or our number threes, and that's like our starting point. And then from there, we just narrow it in. So it's kind of like compromising our styles.
The Cabernet, I actually wanted to try this one with the Calderwood, if we could.
Yes,
Which
yes.
one with the hay on the outside?
Let's
Yeah.
go with Calderwood.
Yeah, so try that, and it's like it's a funny moment to talk about that because the Calderwood is a cheese that is made just for us by Jasper Hill Farm in Vermont, and this was an example of a cheese where we were like, hey, can you like kind of make something slightly different for us? And this is definitely a cheese that's made in the Alpine style, so similar in some ways to Gruyere or Comté or Beaufort, but also has some, which in those cheeses tend to be kind of, you know, nutty and maybe a little beefy. They can kind of taste like a dry aged steak in some ways. But then also with this cheese, you have like some really beautiful, I think, tropical fruit and kind of toasty flavors that come from it being ripened in hay. And so, yeah, I basically talked to the cheesemaker and I was like, hey, you know, they do this, no pun intended. They do this in Europe where cheeses are coated in grass or hay sometimes. Would you be willing to try this for us? And he was like, yeah, totally. Let's give it a shot. And so we kind of invented a cheese, you know, and it, you know, that year it won second place overall best in show at the American Cheese Society Award, which was super exciting and cool. And you know, has just remained to me one of my favorite cheeses of all time. Not just because we, you know, kind of conceived of it together, but because it's just a really cool cheese. And I think with this wine, it'll be great because the cheese itself is very rich. It's very dense because of its age profile. It's aged for about a year. And it has the richness to kind of complement and back up, you know, what's going on with the wine. I don't know if you agree.
And I should eat the rind with this, right?
You can, yeah. This one, depending on the batch, the hay fibers can be a little bit more coarse or more fine. This is definitely on the more coarse side, but I think it's still very interesting to try.
It really is. There's like this there's this like rich rusticness about it that I appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if you try it, so maybe it'd be fun to try it once with the hay and once without, because the hay definitely contributes flavor, but this might be one of the instances where I'm like, texturally it's a bit of a distraction for me. Like I'm not totally loving it. I would rather just have the cheese. You can certainly try it, it's edible, but for me it's like what I really want is like that, you know, richness, butteriness, the kind of toasty, fruity flavors.
It's much more toasty without the rind. Mm-hmm. But I kind of like it with the rind better because it kind of gives you like this, kind of brings out like the primitive nature that's like that's unlock, you know, it's unlocking that primitive nature in your DNA that, mm-hmm. You know, thousands of years ago, this is what our ancestors were like, this style was what was going on, you know?
It's true. Yeah, this style of cheese has been made for over 1,000 years. It was originated in like monasteries in you know, in Europe, and it was made up in the mountains because this type of cheese they made like huge wheels of it, like 80 or 90-pound wheels. And the cheeses tended to be very low in acid because it was cold in those climates. So the fermentation wasn't quite as active as it would have been at lower, warmer temperatures. And they're also low in salt because hauling salt up a mountainside wasn't anyone's favorite thing to do back in those days. So they're kind of meant to be these like long aged, rustic cheeses that were meant to nourish people over the wintertime. But yeah, when you eat it with the rind, it tastes like the cave. To me, having been to this farm many times, this is made at Jasper Hill Farm in Greensboro, Vermont. The rind tastes the way the cave smells. Like I'm sure you have like similar things that happen with wine where just like, that whiff of the aromatic, it just transports you there,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
Like it's very balanced, and yet, and I'd say it's more of like that medium. And correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, it's more of like the medium body, but it's very smooth and balanced. That's like it's a very clean cheese. If that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah, no, it's very rich, but it also, like you said, it has a clean finish, and it's kind of it's just like you said, everything is kind of balanced, and so it's very rich up front, and then it kind of just leaves you with this really satisfying aftertaste.
Yes, I agree. Very good. All right, so we're moving on to the Wischego.
Yes, which is one of the sillier cheese names. So the Wischego, this is made by a woman named Brenda Jensen in Wisconsin. She's located about an hour west of Madison, and she and her husband originally wanted to just farm with draft horses. That was their dream, their kind of retirement plan. And then she got a couple sheep, and then a sheeper wanted to do, had a couple more sheep and a couple more sheep, a couple more, and now she has a flock of about 600. And her cheeses are just phenomenal. And something to be said for the sheep as just a dairy animal is that there's much more butter fat in sheep's milk than there is in cow or goat's milk. Cow and goat's milk has about 4 to 5% butter fat, and sheep has 7%. So I feel like part of the reason why people like Manchego and other sheep's milk cheeses is just that there's more fat in it, and that fat conveys flavor. And that's why it's so rich and wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah. And so this is a blend. This wine is a blend that we're going to be trying of different grapes.
Yes, this is my signature mountain blend. This guy right here, and this one recently got 98 points. So I'm trying to bring Merlot back. Like the movie Sideways really tore Merlot apart, and Merlot is one of my favorite varietals on the face of the earth. And when people are like, well, there's a lot of bad Merlot out there, I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of bad Cabernet Sauvignon out there too, but nobody ever talks about that. They say, oh, it's a Cab, it's good. No, it's not. Not always. But when it's done well, it's mind-blowingly good. And I find the same to be true with Merlot. And whenever someone says they don't like Merlot, I say, have you ever heard of a winery called Petrus or Chateau Cheval Blanc or Le Pen in France? I mean, they are all Merlot producers. So I'm trying to bring it back. My vineyard on the slopes of Helmond, it's very teeny tiny. It's 4 acres, and it was planted in 1993. It's got all 5 Bordeaux varietals, so Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. But it is, I believe, 81% Merlot. So every year the Signature Mountain blend changes because I'm just trying to produce the best blend that it fits within my signature style. What do you think of it?
I love it. I mean, I think it definitely has some like spicy elements to it that I definitely didn't taste in the Cabernet Sauvignon, which was more kind of, dry and kind of earthy and a little leathery, if I'm allowed to say that. I don't know if you would agree that Cabernet Sauvignon had more of that like tannic, kind of dry out your tongue kind of quality to it at the end of the day, which is why I actually liked it with the Calderwood, because that can be so, rich and kind of, and buttery and bold. But this has some really, like you said, like thought-provoking spice to it. I don't know how you would describe it, but a little bit.
There's definitely a spice box characteristic in here for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting one that if you were to taste this on any given day at different times of the year, you'll be picking up different characteristics and different notes as a wine is just continuing to evolve. Right now I'm getting a lot of dark fruit, but historically this wine is kind of a blend between dark fruit and red fruit. And I definitely get the spice notes that you're talking about. It's showing very prominently today in this tasting. And it could be because of the Wischego.
Yeah. Wischego, too much credit. No, but I mean, so would you call cherry a dark fruit? Is that accurate, or what would you call dark fruit?
Well, yeah. In this case, I would say dark cherry, definitely. I would say blackberries. I'm just telling you what I'm picking up for the dark fruit in here. Maybe a little black currant. Pick up some black currant. It's also I'm getting little hints of like decayed rose petals, perhaps. It's got a little hint of that floral behind, like as a secondary note behind the fruit. And then I'm getting a lot of, there's like I'd say it's like a dark cherry liqueur specifically.
Yeah. I can totally see that. Yeah, the dark cherry for me and the little bit of warm spice, those were the two things that really hit me up front. And again, yeah, it's really nice with the cheese. This particular batch of Wischego, it's funny. I always say that with winemakers, you have a vintage every year, but with cheesemakers, you have a vintage every day because the milk is always different. The fat, the protein, depending on where the animals are in their lactation cycle, depending on what they're eating, depending on the season. Are they inside in the barn eating lots of dry hay and maybe a touch of grain? Are they outside grazing fresh pasture that's full of water and different flowers and grasses that contribute different flavors? And this particular batch of Wischego is a little bit more gamey than I'm used to, than is normal. I would say it has more of those kind of like lanolin, sheepy flavors. That I feel like actually play really nicely with the wine, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's very different from a Spanish Manchego style as well. It's like it's its own unique style.
Definitely.
So we're going on to the glow in the dark wine next, the Adair. This wine, it's kind of like a signature mountain blend in the sense that every single year the blends change. And this year was 51% Cabernet Sauvignon, 26% Petit Verdot, and the other 3 Bordeaux varietals. I could turn the lights off, and you can see that this label glows in the dark. But the millennials love it because it's my family coat of arms, but in a more Gothic style.
And you're originally, where's your family from?
Hungary. Hertelendy is a Hungarian last name, and my ancestors have been making wines for the last 300 years. So it's definitely in my DNA. And they were making it not in the Tokaj region, but the western part of Hungary, which is the only volcano area in Hungary. So volcanic terroir. There you go. Once again,
you're drawn to it for a reason.
I didn't know it until after I bought my property. How much that spoke to my DNA. I said, oh.
And when and how did you start making wine?
I started making beer when I was 15.
Very smart, very smart. Find a way to get around that situation.
And then in 2006, I made my first vintage, and I started working for several winery positions that I could at that time, around that time, to just kind of learn from the ground up, experience. And then 2013, I started my own project. So Yeah, it's been 14 years now since I did my first vintage, which doesn't feel like 14 years ago, I'll tell you. But
That's the same as me. I started in 2006 too, so we just celebrated our 14th birthday as well.
cheers to you.
Here's to you. Oh, awesome. And it's funny, I mean, I learned much the same way. I really love cheese, and wanted to learn, like I said, about the making of it. And so I had worked at a cheese shop, but I really wanted to work on a farm. So I went to work at a little farm in Connecticut, Cato Corner Farm. I didn't even plan that, who make the Hooligan that we're going to eat next. And they really taught me everything about, not just about how cheese is made, but about, you know, eating seasonally and sustainably, and the hard work that it takes to, you know, run a farm and make delicious cheese. Hard but very rewarding work. And it's funny, whenever people are trying to get into the industry, I always, or, you know, if they ask for advice about how they can get started, I always say that. I'm like, just go work for free somewhere, you know, and learn as much as you can from someone who knows a lot more than you do, you know, and the lessons will be like, you know, 10,000 fold what you could even dream of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about this Hooligan cheese.
The Hooligan. So I spent many hours in the cellar washing these wheels when I was a long time ago, when I was like in my early 20s. So Hooligan is a washed rind cheese. Let's see, Kunik was a bloomy rind cheese. Calderwood was what I would call a natural rind cheese, where the rind just kind of develops in the cave as the cheese dries out. And the Hooligan is washed. So 2 times a week when this cheese is aging in the cave, they literally will wash the outside of it with a solution that's made of a salt brine, and sometimes cultured with a little bit of cheese rinds in it. And what this special mixture does, it basically creates a house on the outside of the cheese for certain kinds of bacteria to come and live. So washed rind cheeses tend to be pungent and funky and stinky and aromatic, and that is done so by design. By washing the cheese, you're creating a very moist, low acid environment, and so different kinds of bacteria, chief among them, there's Brevibacterium linens is one of the strains, and there are a bunch of others that come and kind of colonize the outside of the rind, and they give it that orange red coloration. That's what makes it kind of stickier in texture, and that's what makes the cheese nice and funky. So they named it Hooligan because it was really hard to get the hang of making it. I think at the beginning they weren't washing it quite enough. And so if you don't wash it twice a week, the rind will just kind of dry out and it'll turn into a dry tome style cheese, like a tome savoie or Saint-Nectaire. So that washing is really integral to the end flavor. And when you taste it, that funk that you get is really from all that TLC that's put into it during the aging.
And this one you do eat the rind, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it is definitely funky. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's really just a beautiful cheese.
It kind of enters like a brie first before the funk kicks in, though.
Hmm. Yep, and then you get those more, I don't know, to me there's almost like a meaty, kind of sanguine, meaty, minerally kind of quality that comes out. And there's also a grit on the rind. It has an almost kind of sandy, gritty quality. And that's actually formed when you're doing that washing of the rind, there are little calcium clusters that recalcify over the course of the aging process. And so that's when you taste a washed rind cheese that tastes a little gritty or has that gritty texture on the outside. That's what that's all about. But I think it needs like a powerful, it needs a powerful wine to play with. And so I think this is a good match.
Yeah, the audere is quite bold. In fact, audere means to dare, to risk, or to venture in Latin. And so I always tell people, indulge in risk.
Yes. And be a hooligan while you do it,
Yeah.
That's cool. After tasting the cheese and then giving it a second, tasting the wine again, it brought up kind of like a second round of like aromatics from the cheese. Like the cheese had been gone and, tasted that, whatever, just had a sip of the wine as a refresher, but instead it brought up kind of a second wave of flavor from the cheese, which is pretty cool.
It's a pretty bold cheese.
Yeah, it is.
And this is a pretty bold wine. So
and it's wine, exactly.
I want to revisit the Chardonnay, but with the Calderwood.
Oh, I was thinking the same thing in the beginning.
That would be the pairing.
And it's interesting because I feel like aromatically, they're probably the most similar, but it'll be interesting to see if they work together as well flavor-wise as they do smell-wise.
Mm-hmm. The Calderwood is delicious.
Yeah, it's so good. What do you think about the wine versus the Kunik? Which one did you like better?
I feel like the Kunik is slightly bolder, and the Calderwood is more. It's kind of like it's more approachable, and it's got this like sophisticated nature about it, where it might not necessarily. You might not necessarily get on the first bite, but by like the third or fourth, you're gonna truly appreciate it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
It grows on you.
Mm-hmm.
It's
and like you said about the wines opening up over time, the cheeses do the same thing. It's like you take them out of the fridge, and they're totally their flavor is totally downplayed. But then you let them sit out for a while and they continue to change and open up and develop. And
I think this is a beautiful pairing.
Mm-hmm.
It brought out more of the fruit notes from the wine, I think, whereas the Kunik brought out more of the finish in the wine.
That's totally true. I just tried the Kunik again, and the Kunik, tasting it again this time, it's very salty. And so I feel like because the wine has a little bit of that fruity creme brulee quality, the saltiness of the cheese definitely works well in that, it kind of is a perfect counterpart to that. But when you have the Calderwood, yeah, it totally changes the nature of the wine.
Which pairing was your favorite, out of curiosity?
So tough. I think, God, isn't this the way it always goes? It's probably the first and the last for me. It's like the Kunik and the Chardonnay. I like the Calderwood, but I like the Kunik better with the Chardonnay, just personally. And then the Auder with the Hooligan, I thought was just super cool and fun, and they met each other where they were at, which I wasn't sure they could do. So I enjoyed both of those a lot. How about you?
I would have to say the Chardonnay with the Calderwood.
Yeah, which is such a classic pairing because mountain cheeses like that are typically paired with white wines that are like that. So that I totally hear you.
Calderwood is just like it's so classic and yet so rustic. I mean, and it might be perceived as simple, but it's very sophisticated at the same time. Like I can't really verbalize how I feel about Calderwood, but I enjoy it thoroughly, and I'm gonna have to order some more from you probably. Well, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I just wanted, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and this is quite a treat. So thank you very much for being a part of this and making making this all happen. And I can't wait to share this with our clientele and our audience. And I think people are really going to love this.
Likewise. Well, I hope so too, and thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, if there's a possibility to collaborate on other virtual tastings and partnerships in our weird new world that we live in, I would totally be up for it. So
absolutely.